Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those within the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Welcome to Insights. I'm Sherry Stewart. Earlier this month, Governor Gretchen Whitmer announced a plan to jumpstart the state's economy in the midst of this ongoing pandemic. The governor calls her plan the Michigan COVID Relief Plan, and she says it includes a direct focus on three areas: vaccine distribution, small business, and schools. Today, we'll take a look at the governor's proposal and get reaction from the state's leading nonprofit organization that represents small businesses in the state. But first up, we want to bring you some snippets from the governor's press conference.
Today, my administration is announcing the Michigan COVID Recovery Plan so that we can grow our economy as we work to end the COVID-19 pandemic. The Michigan COVID Recovery Plan is focused on 1, protecting public health, 2, getting our students back on track, and 3, jump-starting our economy. The most important thing that we can do to grow our economy and to help businesses get back on their feet is to protect public health and end the pandemic. And that's why a part of the Michigan COVID Recovery Plan is to ramp up vaccine distribution so we can get more shots in arms, so we can return to a strong economy and get back to normal as soon as possible. Last month, Congress appropriated $90 million in additional resources for vaccine distribution in Michigan through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. My plan is to use this federal funding to scale up vaccine distribution in Michigan and bring us closer to our goal of 50,000 shots in arms per day. Michigan will also receive $575 million to expand COVID testing, tracing, and lab capacity in Michigan. I've been working closely with our departments across state government to develop a number of new initiatives that will help us jumpstart our economy under the Michigan COVID Recovery Plan. Our business owners who've been hit the hardest by this pandemic, and we are doing everything that we can to make sure that they've got the support they need. The MEDC has developed a number of new programs to help our small business owners get through this tough winter and get back on their feet. The Michigan Main Street Initiative that will help stabilize our small business community by securing grants for restaurants and other place-based businesses to keep our main streets vibrant and our communities resilient. The Michigan Micro Enterprise Support Initiative will help us put small businesses with less than 9 employees on the path to recovery by creating greater access to much needed support. And the Business Accelerator and Resiliency Initiative will provide grants to high-tech startups that can help our communities thrive. The Michigan COVID Recovery Plan also appropriates hundreds of millions of federal dollars in rental, housing, and food assistance to help families who need it most. And to help families and businesses in Michigan's rural communities, I'm creating the Office of Rural Development, charged with coordinating work across state government to address issues facing rural communities, including broadband, talent, infrastructure, and more. Our small businesses are fixtures in their communities. Some have been around for decades. They're working around the clock to stay afloat while trying to keep their communities safe from COVID-19, and they deserve as much support as we can give them. Let's make Michigan the place where people come to restart their businesses. I also urge the legislature to pass Good Jobs for Michigan, legislation that will boost our economy and create good paying jobs. The Good Jobs for Michigan program provides Michigan businesses with a crucial tool to create jobs and thrive in our state. Little known fact, but Pfizer was the first business to utilize Good Jobs for Michigan, and did so to build their sterile drug manufacturing plant in Portage, creating 450 good-paying jobs. That's right, the same Portage, Michigan plant where the first doses of Pfizer's safe, effective, and approved vaccine shipped from at the end of last year that gave all of us such pride to see on the national news. Michigan being the epicenter of hope. Pfizer is proof that good jobs for Michigan legislation can boost our economy and create jobs. It's time for the legislature to get this passed and get to my desk. I'm also once again calling on the Michigan legislature to permanently extend the unemployment benefits from 20 to 26 weeks. At the end of last year, I signed legislation that extend benefits through the end of March, as soon as the legislature removes the tie bar to a $220 million tax giveaway. It's time to stop playing games and for both parties in the legislature to roll up their sleeves and to get this done. Let's permanently extend these benefits to 26 weeks, no strings attached. Let's increase the weekly benefit and provide some much needed support for Michiganders who've lost work. I'll also continue to work with the federal government to address the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Michigan's was built up over the last decade and was in great shape prior to the pandemic. Help from the federal government would be beneficial for Michigan families, our business community, and our economy as a whole. Due to the pandemic and economic crisis, all 50 states have drained trust funds, and it's going to take a national effort to solve this crisis. I'm committed to working with the incoming administration to address it so we can provide working families with the financial security and peace of mind that they need and deserve. Last, the Michigan COVID recovery plan will help our students and educators get back on track. As a part of recent actions from the federal government, Michigan was allocated nearly $1.7 billion through the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. The My COVID Recovery Plan will allocate this federal funding along with an additional $300 million in state funds to help schools meet our goal of providing every student an in-person learning opportunity by March 1, and to help address the learning loss that has occurred due to this pandemic. These one-time flexible dollars will be distributed through a formula that recognizes the additional costs that are associated with supporting students who are in poverty and students with special education needs. This crucial action will provide our students and educators with the support they need as we return to in-person learning this spring.
We'll have more of Insights right after this, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Charles Owens. He is the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business.
Insights will return after these messages.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Charles Owens. He is the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. And I shall let you know that the NFIB is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and member-driven organization. So welcome, Charles. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and your membership is about 10,000 strong here in the state of Michigan, correct?
Yeah, about 10,000 in Michigan, about 275,000 nationwide.
Right, so a large organization with, a pretty solid agenda to help represent and support the small business community. We know that the governor has outlined her plan to kickstart the economy in the midst of this pandemic. We just showed bits and pieces of her press conference where she introduced the Michigan COVID Recovery Plan. And I know that the NFIB, you also have your agenda for 2021 as well. So before we get to yours, I want to get your reaction to what the governor has presented. Do you believe that we're heading in the right direction with her focus? She says that the focus of that plan has three tenets: vaccine distribution, small businesses, and schools. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, the vaccine is integral to getting the economy back open, which is our number one item on our agenda. Everything else on our agenda is academic. If we don't get the state open and we don't get our members able to have customers and generate revenue, that also helps the state, obviously, because they share in that with their taxes. So we think that that's job number one. Schools, again, our biggest struggle we were having before the pandemic was finding qualified workers. That's even more difficult now. You have folks that can't get daycare. They're used to having their children in school so they can work. Now the children are at home, so that creates a difficulty for them to do their jobs if they have jobs. So we would agree that the schools need to be open. On the small business part, Again, we're not going to be ungrateful for any amount of aid that can come to help small business, whether that's from the federal or state. But when you consider that small business is almost 50% of the economy in this state, frankly, in the country, 225 million, that sounds like a lot of money to the average person, and it is a lot of money. But when you consider the economic disruption caused by the pandemic, that's about a teaspoon of water in Lake Michigan. So not trying to sound ungrateful, but that alone isn't going to turn things around. What will is opening up the economy. Also, the 225 million is split up into 3 programs, as I understand it. And it seems like 125 million, she calls a Main Street initiative, and it just says help businesses survive the pandemic. All of these 3 programs, the 125 million, 25 million for businesses with 9 or fewer employees. And I do commend the governor for bifurcating this money to help. We get into this whole thing of what a small business is. And I think if you go back to the federal PPP loans, the Payroll Protection Program loans, some of these small businesses were pretty big businesses.
Right.
So by getting it right down to an employee count, I think that's very helpful. The amount of money, 25 million is a little meager, and then 75 million, as I understand it, for high-tech startups. I'm not really sure what that means, but not trying to take anything away from the high-tech sector, but we really don't. I think that money would be better spent helping businesses survive right now, not singling out a particular industry for that amount of money. So we do appreciate the initiative, but the real thing that we need is to get this state open, get these closures ended, these restrictions pulled back where we can, and get our economy rolling. That's going to be the ultimate answer for Michigan.
Okay, well, that's a nice segue into the NFIB, your Main Street agenda for 2021, as you call it, call that document. So one of the bullet points here you have is to pursue all avenues on restoring legislative oversight. So tell me what you're thinking there.
Well, obviously, one of the challenges that we've had as a state is that the governor has assumed a rather unilateral approach to dealing with the pandemic in both the public health side and in the economic side. First, through executive orders, which again pretty much cut out the role of the legislature, and that was ruled unconstitutional, as your listeners are aware, by the Supreme Court. But she was able to pivot over to her agencies on a lot of those orders, not all of them. But the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, is pretty much using their authority to do close down orders, shut down orders. And MIOSHA is taking over the area of emergency rules on COVID-19 protocols for the workplace. So she's been able to do that. And of course, the legislature has passed legislation that would limit the powers of those agencies to 28 days. Which is similar to what we have under the current emergency act that's left in place after the other one was declared, those orders unconstitutional. She's vetoed that. So we start the new legislative session. That particular legislation is now Senate Bill 1, and it's pretty much a tradition that whatever is Senate Bill 1 is the Senate's top priority. So their top priority is to bring that bill back and limit these agencies their ability to shut down an industry or segment of the economy to 28 days, and then after that they would need legislative approval. So that's one thing that we will be supporting. The other is, even though the governor's got some very powerful abilities under her agencies, she still needs to get some things through legislation, in particular appropriations. This proposal that she's laid out, which totals between federal and state money almost $5.7 billion, has to be appropriated by the legislature. It has to come through the legislature. So it's fine that she has a plan and that she's put it forward, but the legislature is going to decide really what ends up on her desk for her to sign. And the House Appropriations Chair, Representative Tom Albert, has made it clear that they're not going to necessarily give the governor everything she wants, if she's not going to include them as a partner. So we do think we'll see some aggressive use of the appropriations process to restore the legislature's role in policy making, and we support that as well.
All right. Well, Charles, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we want to talk about your proposal to waive license fees for businesses that have been forced to close throughout this pandemic. Let's talk about that when we come back.
Insights will return after these messages.
Welcome back to Insights. We're continuing our conversation with Charles Owens. He is the statewide director for the National Federation of Independent Business, representing, of course, the state of Michigan here. And you cover several other regions, though. I should mention that as well.
Yes, I also manage 5 other states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa. And we are a nationwide organization, so we're in all 50 state capitals, and we have a lobbying presence in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so a lot of heavy lifting that you're doing there, Charles. But before the break, we said we were going to come back and talk about your proposal to waive the license fees for businesses that have been forced to close here in Michigan. And we know that we've seen many stories where businesses have been fined, they've been suspended, licenses have been suspended for certain infractions, I guess, going against the governor's grain in terms of the proposals set forth. So what are your thoughts on that? Seems like it would be a good idea so that the businesses are not responsible for those fees, but how do you think you'll be able to get this passed?
Well, we'll have legislation introduced, and I know there's much interest in this from both the House and the Senate. But basically what we're saying is if you close down a business for 3 months, they shouldn't have to, and they have a license that they are required to pay a fee for to the state, and that should be prorated so that they don't, so 3 out of 12 months of that is deducted from their license fee, right, since they were unable to open. Of course, in the case of the restaurant industry, it would be much more than that. So we just think that's another way to help them out with their budget. For example, there was also legislation that would allow businesses that were late paying their summer property taxes. Mm-hmm. It would waive the fees and penalties from the local governments for that. And it was funded so that the local governments wouldn't miss the money, the state would make it up. Mm-hmm. But that would allow businesses that are struggling to, with the loss of revenue from shutdowns and such, to be able to pay their summer taxes late without fees and penalties. The governor vetoed that, and then oddly enough proposed it in her recent COVID recovery that we do that. So I don't know why she vetoed it, and then she brought it up, but maybe now that it's her idea, it'll have some legs.
Well, let's talk a little bit about another proposal here in your agenda. You say halt the micromanagement of the employer-employee relationship. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, there's already government involved in the employee-employer relationship. We acknowledge that. Whether we agree with that or not doesn't matter. That's the law. We're talking about minimum wage. We're talking about the requirement to carry workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. You have to have that if you're an employer. All of these are governments being involved in the employer-employee relationship, but some want to take that even further. For example, we've been successful in defeating attempts to micromanage what can be on an employment application. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about things related to race or gender, those kinds of things. We certainly support not that shouldn't be a criteria for hiring anybody. But one example is there is an effort called Ban the Box that's been popular in a lot of states, and some cities have attempted it in Michigan, and it's been in legislation proposed at the state level, but not. We've been successful in keeping that from passing. It simply says you can't even have a box on the, typically a lot of employment applications have a box that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Right.
And they want that just completely removed. Now, we understand the challenges of somebody coming out of the prison system and trying to come back into society and obtain employment. However, as employers, we're liable for what our employees do in a lot of situations, particularly if you think of a business that has people going into homes and conducting a service, whether that's personal care or construction, renovation. It's important if you have an employee that harms a customer or does something illegal, the employer is going to end up in that chain of liability. in addition, of course, to the individual. So if you have someone, for example, that has been convicted of a felony for attacking people and assault and battery and that kind of a nature, you need to, it's important that an employer knows that. Now, some employers, just because you check the box, a lot of employers, like if they're in the security business and you're convicted of a felony, that's difficult for an employer to justify that hire. However, if they have a back office job for that person, they might pursue that. Because employers are so desperate for employees, lots of times when that box is checked, they'll ask follow-up questions to figure out what exactly the criminal activity was and whether that's something that they can still employ that individual. But advocates for banning that box just want to take it off there. They say, well, at the end of you go through the whole hiring process with the application, the interview, background checks on other things, and then you can ask them that question. Well, that is a lot of time wasted for both the applicant and the employer to go through that whole process, get to the end, and then find out that they can't hire them. So we were successful in defeating that attempt. Another attempt is called predictive scheduling, where they want to micromanage how an employer schedules employees, saying that if you have you have to notify an employee 2 weeks ahead of time if they're not going to be working on a specific day, or if you're going to require them to work overtime or ask them to work overtime on a specific day. Most small businesses don't have that kind of flexibility. You don't know on Friday who's going to call in sick for the weekend, and you have to scramble to shuffle your personnel to keep that business open, particularly in the restaurant business, for example. So that's not practical for small businesses. It might be practical for a large company with an HR department. These are the kinds of micromanagement things that we're opposed to and will continue to fight against.
They're making it very difficult. So, Charles, in the time that we do have remaining, how successful do you think you will be in actually seeing many of your proposals from your agenda for 2021 actually come to fruition for our small business community here in the state of Michigan?
Well, if you look at our Main Street agendas for the year before and the year before, you'll find that when we're not successful, we just carry them forward. We never give up. So if we don't get everything accomplished in this legislative session, and that's still something that's important to our members, because sometimes things that are on there become moot because the federal government passes a law that basically overrules the state and it makes it a moot point. But my point is, we just roll these over and we add to it. There are things that'll happen this session that aren't on there because things happen. We'll throw it on the agenda and we'll deal with it. But we're pretty successful in most of these. I do think that we're going to see some changes relative to the legislature's position in government. I think the first year was kind of a difficult time for everybody. But I think in 2021, there's just going to have to be more give and take between the governor's office and the legislature. And I hope that's positive.
And I'm sure your members do as well. I want to thank you for spending time with us today, Charles, and going over your agenda and responding to what the governor's proposals are and her plan as well.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that does it for this week's episode. If you have a question, comment, or story idea, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at news@wbkb11.com. I'm Sherry Stewart. Thank you for watching and have a great week.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.